The Second World War, a podcast by Stephen Bedard.
Welcome to the Second World War, and in this episode, I am excited to talk to Jim Carter, who is the author of Hearts of Steel. And I really enjoyed this book. And I think I enjoyed it not just because it covered a part of military history that I wasn't completely familiar with, but the perspective that it took. A lot of the books that I've read really come from the perspective of the top commanders and what they were thinking and the higher level strategy that was taking place. And this one felt more like it was like you were right on the deck of the ship with them. So I'm thankful for Jim Carter to have written this book. And Jim, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on today, Stephen. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so my background's been in business, telecommunications industry for probably about 25 years. And luckily, we sold our business back in 2018, which allowed me to retire, write this book, learn to fly, which was another ambition of mine. But my background, my interest has been since I was a boy, has been military history. So it was great fun to really get and do something meaningful out of that interest, for want of a better phrase.
Wonderful. So what drew you to this particular story?
So my grandmother gave me a book called War at Sea, which was it was a coffee table book, load of pictures and the like, and in it she'd annotated a number of little notes on her father, a chap called Herbert Leader, who was an able seaman throughout from 1918 through to 1945, effectively. And I noticed that he'd served on a tribal destroyer, HMS Nubian. Having an interest in military history, I knew what a tribal was. I hadn't really heard about HMS Nubian before, and I thought, well, I ought to really look into this a bit more and see what he did. And then my mother gave me his S459 service record. And I looked at that. There was over 16 ships that he'd served on, and I thought, crikey, that's a hell of a career. There must be a story here, and if nothing else, I need to write it down for my kids and let them know what he did. And it slowly morphed into this huge book, and which was great fun to write. So I didn't really have it in my head to set off to write a book, but it ended up that way.
Wonderful. Well, I think some of the best books are those that we write for our families, and then we find that there's a much wider interest there. Yeah. So your book covers the period of part of World War I and then into part of World War II, because that covers the time of service. And so as you were going into this, what did your research look like? What kind of tools did you use? You've already mentioned a couple of things, but what else did you rely on?
Yeah, sure. So I started to gather some books together to get me a bit of a try and find out a little bit more about HMS Nubian and her career and the campaigns that she was in. And naively, I started off with 3 or 4, and I ended up with about 50. So I was really delving into any little detail that touched HMS Nubian or the other ships that my great grandfather was involved in. But then, of course, I needed to look a bit wider from that as well. So I was delving into the National Archives up at Kew in London, and the Imperial War Museum up in London as well. And I spent a bit of time at the Royal Naval Library in Portsmouth, which was really helpful because they identified a couple of books that were written on the commissions that my great grandfather did to the East India Station down in Sri Lanka, which was Ceylon at the time. And that gave me that framework of writing the middle part, as it were, about the interwar years. And of course I delved online as well a bit, although you have to be a bit careful with the sources online, but and have to really make sure that they're relevant. But yeah, so quite a wide breadth of information, but fascinating to do. And you could. And the trouble was, you'd end up going down lots and lots of different rabbit holes. I remember researching one chap who was the gunner aboard Nubian, and he came from Nottingham, and his family were in the lace industry. And I found myself one afternoon going researching the lace industry, and I suddenly thought, I don't really need this for my book, actually. So yeah, it's really weird where it takes you.
Yeah, yeah. One of the ones that kind of struck home for me, you used a diary, a ship diary written by one of the chaplains of one of the ships, and the reason that kind of struck a chord with me is I'm a Army chaplain myself, in the reserves, and it just was very interesting to think about that. This person, I'm sure, had no idea that what he was writing would be used for a wider audience.
Yes, Ray was his name. REA, it's spelt. Yeah, he was a very interesting character, and he was of the two books. That was the second book of those two commissions. The first one was written sort of a collaboration between all the crew, and the second one that Ray was tasked was to gather all that information together. So it's very much from his perspective throughout, and yeah, he had his work cut out. He had 700 men to look after.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah. So I liked how you went right into the background of the beginning parts of joining the Navy. So if you could kind of take us back to that time in history, what kind of things would motivate an individual to join the Navy? What were the forces at work?
Well, certainly they were, for the lower decks, most of those guys were from very poor backgrounds. They, my great grandfather was from the workhouse, which surprised me. I didn't know that until I got into it. But there was a lot of people in the UK and not that many jobs around. And there was labouring jobs. You might be in farming. You might be working in the city, getting jobs as page boys, that kind of stuff, and real dead end jobs. And they weren't jobs for life either. And times were tough. So the military certainly gave them that security. They could sign on. A lot of them signed on for 12 years, which was the maximum at the time. They'd sign on for 12 years. They get a roof over their head. They get regular pay. They get clothed, well looked after, and probably travel as well. So that would have been very, very interesting to them. For the Royal Navy in particular, certainly pre World War One and going through that time, it was the service to be in. The senior service was the elite, and it wasn't easy to get in. 1 in 4 got into the Royal Navy at the time. So it was quite a thing to go and do, and probably a way out. And I think certainly for my great grandfather, it provided him with a career. Okay, it took him away from his family an awful lot. He became a family man and was away for long periods of time. But it cemented his life effectively.
And I see